Okay guys, I didn't expect this one, but the overwhelming request I am getting in the comments section of my videos is to compare the new ZV-E10 to the fairly new A7C. Wasn't gonna do it, but you guys asked for it. Here you go, you savages. Let's talk about it. Now these cameras do have a lot in common. They are both Sony rangefinder mirrorless cameras, 24 megapixel sensors. They have the same frame rates, the same resolution, 4K up to 30p, 1080p up to 120 frames per second. They both have the flip out 360-degree articulating screen. They both shoot in S-Log2, S-Log3, and HLG. They both have the ability to record gyroscope data, so you can use the free Catalyst Browse software for stabilization. And they share the same E-mount, so they can take any of Sony's E-mount lens collection. Now, all that being said, there are some differences, and they are major differences. Now, let's start with the obvious. The A7C has a 2.36 million dot EVF, the thing you look through. In most cameras, the ZV-E10 doesn't have a thing you can look through, so you can only look at the screen on the back of the camera like it's some kind of smartphone. So if you were going to take photos, the A7C is far better for that. Also, if you want to frame a shot in bright sunlight, having the EVF can also be extremely helpful. The next major obvious thing is the A7C is full frame. Now with full frame, you get a sensor that is 2.3 times bigger than the APS-C sensor. And what does that give you? That gives you better dynamic range. It gives you better ability in low light and at higher ISOs. You will get better autofocus in low light situations as well. And then there's the bokeh. At the same aperture, you're going to get a blurrier background on a full frame sensor. And if this confuses you, I will link a video here by a guy named DB Varez. It's a very good explanation of sensor size and the different effects on bokeh. And leave a comment in his, tell him Cameracrisis sent you. For example, if you had a 2.8 aperture on an APS-C camera and a 2.8 aperture on a full frame camera, the 2.8 on the full frame is going to have a blurrier background. They will both let in the same amount of light, but the 2.8 will be blurrier on the full frame because it has a larger sensor and a larger opening for the lens going onto the sensor. And because of this larger sensor, for the most part, you'll be able to find lenses that have a lower aperture if you are a real big fan of the blurry background. Say you're the next Tony Northcropp wannabe, then you want to get your aperture as low as you can. Like, for instance, Sony sells for the full frame a 50 millimeter 1.2. So to get that level of blur on an APS-C camera, you would have to get an f/0.8, and that does not exist, because the thing is, to get the equivalent depth of field and field of view, you have to times your APS-C focal length and aperture by 1.5, right? So a 16 mil 1.4 on an APS-C is, in full frame terms of field of view and depth of field, is really a 24 millimeter f/2.1. Clear as mud. By the way, that 50 mil 1.2 only cost $2,000. No biggie. We'll get into price later. Now that's the thing with a full frame camera, you can grow into very expensive lenses if you want. Say your uncle Scrooge McDuck dies, maybe you want to go get those fancy G-Master lenses that will pair nicer with the A7C. They'll fit on the APS-C, but it still has those sensor limitations, so you're never going to get the full quality out of your full frame glass on the APS-C. It has a much better build quality, solid camera made out of good plastic and metal, so it can take some abuse. The ZV-E10 is going to be a delicate, lightweight camera, and you're not going to be able to use it in rugged situations. And speaking of that, the A7C is weather sealed as well. So you want to take it out in the rain and the snow and the sand dunes, or wherever you kids are going these days. You can take the A7C, you cannot take the ZV-E10. And also, keeping with the body, there are more customizable buttons on the A7C, and the Sony menus aren't the best, so it's nice to have customizable buttons that you can use. And the front dial is actually also better because it has custom modes on the front dial, and things like aperture priority, shutter priority. You can flip around a lot faster on the A7C, so even for video that's better, but certainly for photography, once again, it is much better. Now there's also a crop mode on the Sony A7C, so you can effectively get two focal lengths out of one lens. There is a caveat to this though, and that is you will lose resolution. Now, so if you have a 35mm lens, let's say, on your full frame Sony A7C, and you go into APS-C crop mode, now it's more like a 50mm lens. And in video, that actually works quite well because there's plenty of megapixels to go around for 4K video. Now, when it comes to photos, I wouldn't necessarily do it unless it was maybe online photos, because you go in the APS-C mode and it crops down to about 10 megapixels of your sensor. So you're not getting the full resolution of your sensor or the greatest quality out of your lenses, but it is nice to have that option, especially in video. And of course, you can use the APS-C crop sensor to use APS-C lenses, which are often cheaper on your A7C, but as I just explained, that's not necessarily the best idea because you're losing resolution on your sensor and you want to get the best out of your sensor. Am I right? Now, this one YouTube is going to love. There is less rolling shutter on the A7C. People are all aflutter about the shutter on the on the ZV-E10. People are afraid of it. The thing is, like, the way I shoot, I never experience rolling shutter. I don't walk around shaking my camera like crazy. I put it on tripods. I set up angles, you know, and if I were to use the ZV-E10, I would use catalyst browse. I'm getting ahead of myself. The rolling shutter is still better on the A7C because the sensor has a faster readout, so you get less of that jello effect. Now I'll move on to the other point I almost jumped into, which is IBIS. The A7C has in-body image stabilization, and that sounds great, and it's better than not having it, but the IBIS on the A7C is not very good when it comes to, say, video and hand holding. Like, I have the A7 III, and that has Sony's IBIS in it, and it's pretty garbage when you're going to walk around. It is not really good stability like this GH5 I'm filming on right now. This thing has fantastic IBIS. Olympus cameras, fantastic in-body image stabilization, but the Sonys are not quite good at it. It's nice to have it in the camera again, especially for photos. Now, if you're nice and smooth with your camera and you're just making small movements and you're acting like a regular human who shoots video, not one of these vloggers, and you're moving slowly, the IBIS in the A7C is actually going to help a lot. But if you're going to move around a fair bit, you're going to be walking and talking to your camera, then you should use the Catalyst Browse, which the A7C has, but the ZV-E10 also has. So the Catalyst Browse is not a point for the A7C, but the IBIS definitely is, especially in photos. Another advantage of the A7C is the battery life. It uses a much bigger battery, so it gets 740 shots versus 440 shots of the ZV-E10, so almost double the battery life, which is quite significant. And now, because of the bigger battery, it also has a bigger grip, so a far more comfortable camera to hold as well. I mean, the A7C is not the world's most comfortable camera, but it's going to be a lot better to hold than the little ZV-E10 and that sort of grip. And right now you may be thinking that's a lot of advantages the A7C has over the little ZV-E10, but the ZV-E10 actually does have some advantages over the A7C. It has product showcase mode. Now, that might not be an advantage to some people, and maybe they'd never use it, but a lot of people do use it, like YouTubers especially. You hold something up, it goes to focus it, and then you take it down, and it goes back to your dumb old face. And that can be quite useful. I have the A7 III, like you saw, and I know what that autofocus is like. It's nice that it sticks to your face, but when you're trying to show something, you gotta cover up your face with your sweaty hand so that, you know, you can show a product. That looks weird, you know? Hey, look at my product. The ZV-E10 has a tally light and a big red ring around the screen when it's recording, and that is more useful than you might think. I have often shot with Sony cameras, and when I went to press the record button, which was hidden there on the back, I pressed it twice instead of pressing it once, so it didn't record a damn thing, and I'm staring at the camera like a fool. Like a fool! Now, yes, with the A7C you would have a flip-out screen, but then it's only got a little red dot on the screen blinking, and maybe if you're far enough away from the camera, maybe you can't see that little blinking red dot, so you can see the big red line or the tally light. I think that's a useful feature. It is a lighter camera, so 343 grams versus 509 grams, and that can make a difference if you're trying to pair lenses on a gimbal, although to be fair, the A7C is not very heavy for a full-frame camera. It also has a better built-in microphone. Now, most of us will be using, you know, an external mic like I have here. It looks like a rotten banana dangling over my head, and you're going to use external mics for the most part, but in a pinch, if you don't have one, it's nice to know that the ZV-E10 has a better onboard mic. Lenses. You have the option of using APS-C design lenses for the camera as well as full-frame lenses for the camera. And yes, like I said before, you can use the A7C the same way, but it makes more sense to use APS-C lenses on an APS-C body because you're not using any kind of crop. You're going to use the full 24 megapixels. If you use an APS-C lens, you get the full resolution of your APS-C sensor. And if you use a full-frame lens, you get the full resolution of your APS-C sensor. Because you could get an APS-C design 16mm, and that will use the 24 megapixel sensor. And then you can get a 16mm full-frame lens, and that will use the 24 megapixel sensor. Do you see what I'm saying? And because it can so effectively use the APS-C lenses, you can often find cheaper lenses. The APS-C lenses are usually less expensive than the full-frame glass. And speaking of price, here we go. What we've all been waiting for, the price. The ZV-E10 is $699 on B&H as of August 19th, 2021, and the A7C is $1,798 on B&H. That is way more than double the price. So this brings us to our question. Let's wrap here. Kids, you see, obviously the A7C overall is a better camera, but is it so much better that you're willing to spend $1,798 plus the expense of full frame glass when you can get very excellent image quality out of the little ZV-E10 and some really nice glass? You could pair the Sigma 16mm f1.4 or the 30 by Sigma 1.4 or the 56 by Sigma 1.4. I love that trio of lenses. If you can't tell, you could stick that on the little ZV-E10 and have a killer setup that will get you footage that rivals, absolutely rivals, the A7C. Will it have quite the bokeh? Maybe not, if you have really fast glass for your A7C, which again is very expensive, but the bottom line is it will rival it. A lot of people will be pairing the ZV-E10 with an A7 III or an A7C. And there you have it. Are the extra features a little better dynamic range, better low light, more bokeh? Are they worth it to you? Are they worth the big expense that comes with a full frame system? I'll leave it up to you to decide. I can't dictate your life. I wish I could, but I can't. I will tell you this though, I have pre-ordered the ZV-E10, so I am certainly going to use it. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos about that little beauty. Coming up, I already own the A7 III, so getting an A7C for me I think would be overkill. Anyway, so maybe this helped and maybe it didn't. I'm just glad you watched to the end. Thanks so much. We'll see you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.